The war in Ukraine has changed the world, and now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project ReinforceUa, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on ReinforceUa.com.
Let's start. Dear colleagues and friends, welcome on ReinforceUa project and on behalf of First Ukrainian Business School, MIM, I'm welcoming you on this very important project, which is designed in order to inspire and reinforce business community in Ukraine. For these purposes, we invited the most renowned intellectuals worldwide to address the issues which are at the moment very actual in the world and which become very critical, especially because of Russian aggressions in Ukraine. The project was made possible due to support of Bogdan Havrilyshin Family Foundation and partnership with three global business school associations worldwide: AACSB, AMBA, and EFMD. We are grateful to our partners and we are grateful to all participants who have been registered to the project, donated money to support women, Ukrainian women temporarily removed and who want to start their own businesses. Before I shall give the floor to our honorable guest today, I would like to remind you that at the end of today's session, we shall have Q&A session, time for questions. And those who are interested in questioning, please use Q&A button rather than chat. This session will be recorded, and all everybody and other participants would be available. We shall have a chance to look at it and to consider and to reflect on those subjects we shall discuss today later on ReinforceUa webpage. And now I have a privilege to welcome our honorable guest, Dr. Caryn Beck-Dudley, the President and CEO of AACSB International, a global non-profit association that connects educators, students, and business to achieve a common goal: to create the next generation of great leaders. Professor Dr. Caryn Beck-Dudley previously served as a dean in Levy School of Business in Santa Clara University, and before that, the dean of College of Business in Florida State University. She is an attorney and a business consultant, and we'll continue a discussion somehow today, started 1 week ago by Professor Thomas Chamora-Presumek. So we'll speak about leaders. And Professor Beck-Dudley, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. And I believe my associate is going to share some slides with you. I really appreciate being here. And I'm hoping part of this can be interactive. I'm going to ask you to use the Q&A button for some parts of this. And my prepared remarks aren't that long. And so hopefully we'll have a lot of questions and answers at the end. But I do want to thank you for letting us take part in this important lecture series. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has shaken us all to our core. We do stand in awe of the resilience of the Ukrainian people and understand the importance and necessity of renewal and rebuilding. So I want you to know we are standing with you and hope that by our participation, we can go a little way in preparation for a better tomorrow. So AACSB's vision is to transform global business education to create the leaders of tomorrow who can have a positive impact on society worldwide. MIM is a member school of AACSB, and we stand with you in this effort. So I do want to do a quick slide on AACSB in general. For those of you who may not be familiar with AACSB, we are a global nonprofit association that connects educators, learners, and businesses to achieve a common goal: to develop, once again, the next generation of great leaders. And that's what many of you already are. So I hope this short lecture can help you build on those characteristics to be an even better leader. AACSB was established over 100 years ago, And I want to reiterate once again that our vision is to transform business education globally for positive societal impact. We believe that business schools and really all of education have the power and the potential to lift people up and support the redevelopment of societies around the world. So one of the important things I want you to keep in mind as we talk today is that education is not just about a degree. Education is the process of acquiring new knowledge and expanding your skills with a curious mind and an entrepreneurial spirit. So with this in mind, I want you to think of the term entrepreneurship in a different context. It's not just reserved for the process of starting a new business. It really is a mindset that draws on the creativity and the desire to solve a problem that really can lead to new opportunities for collaboration and knowledge sharing. So while entrepreneurship may be associated with risk, it also offers the opportunity for great reward, personal, professional, societal, or financial. So each session presented through the MIM Business School's Knowledge Hub is an opportunity for all of us to explore a variety of leadership approaches that you can further define your goals and support you as you take your next steps. I personally believe that no matter who you are, you can make a difference in your own life and in the lives of others. So change begins with one spark of imagination, one idea, and one step forward. And while things continue to change, we truly are all in this together. So this session, and I think all of your sessions, are about leadership. So I do have some questions, and I'm hoping that you can place your answers in the Q&A. And so to kind of help set the stage on what we're looking for. So the first question for you is, what trait or characteristic do you believe make an effective leader? Anybody want to add? I think someone was going to translate for me if they've got some in. Usually what we see in this is some traits of characteristics will be agility, emotional intelligence. I see resilience, perseverance, effectiveness, vision, caring, empathy. Any others? So all of these are really characteristics. And notice professionalism, vision, charisma. Others? I appreciate that because a communicator like that. So no, intelligence, to be honest, in front of himself, needs oriented, empathy. All of these are very, very interesting. I like this, mostly about emotions and management, planning, motivation, controlling, open mindset, translation, teamwork. So I appreciate this. We're going to have two more questions on that, but notice the ability to work with a team. It's interesting to think about these traits and characteristics, and if those would, creativity, reflection, and whether those would have been traits you would have selected 5, 10, 15, or 20 years ago. Those, I think, responsibility, all those types of traits really do make an effective leader. And notice that we're asking people to be living a personal example, great one as well. We're asking people to be different than what we've asked them to be for perhaps in the past. And so effective leaders come in a variety of different buckets, a role model, etc. Let's go to the second question to kind of tee this up. How do you think the best leaders are developed? And this, I think, is a hard part. So where do they acquire those traits? And where should they acquire those traits? I mean, for example, are they acquired at higher education or in business school? Are they acquired on the job? So how do you think the best leaders are developed? Anything in the Q&A? Where do you acquire these kinds of traits? Are you born with them? Can you learn them? Meeting the life challenges? Yep, strong mentor. others. This is actually one of the challenges for education. Problems, solving problems, experience and studying. You do learn them, hopefully. Great leaders need great role models in the course of work and professional development, inherent personal values, born and educated, trying being a leader and learning from others. Maybe failure helps. There we go, personal successes and failures. Experience and personal models, self-motivation in society or socium. Okay, let's take one last question. And that is continuous development. Couldn't agree more on that. It's practice, practice, practice. Then the last question is, what are the most challenging leadership traits to develop? So for you, empathy, understanding, patience. For me, patience would be definitely hard. Emotional stability. It's a mix of qualities a person is born with: experience, learning, and practicing leadership. Listening, that is hard. It depends from the person itself. Effective teamwork, hard. Creativity and open mind. Creativity, ability to improve after feedback. Yeah, got it. Moving further during failure. Yeah, I really appreciate all of these, and we're going to build upon some of those as we move forward. But thank you. If you would have been in a class with me, I would have called on you in the class. So I appreciate your willingness to participate in kind of a classroom environment as we move forward. So today I am going to go into a little more detail on what I consider to be two types of leadership. There's leadership within an organization. I like that, constantly finding a meaning in a rather delusional job. Yeah, seeing where the right application of skills of different people. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. But so there's leadership within an organization. How do I lead an organization? And how does an organization actually lead? And personal leadership. So what characteristics do I as an individual or an individual person need to develop to be an effective leader? So as we all know, this is a pivotal time in history where we look out across society and we see so many complex issues that need to be addressed. There's lots of problems out there, as we all know, but I truly believe that these complex issues are addressable if we as leaders move forward, once again, with empathy and compassion. And we also need to inspire and develop others to lead that way as well. So as I mentioned earlier, I really believe everyone has the power to be a leader and make a difference. So you don't need a title or a designation next to your name. And progress, I believe, begins with inspiration, motivation, and most importantly, collaboration. It is very difficult to lead alone in today's environment. So let's talk about what leadership can look like within an organization. So I'd like to share with you AACSB's leadership model. This is structured around 4 primary tenets. That's that we all need to lead ourselves, we all need to lead others, we all need to lead change, and we all need to lead the organization. And we believe by exhibiting and acting on these 4 tenets, everyone within our organization will have the entrepreneurial spirit necessary to solve our organization's most pressing problems. So I want to give some personal examples. I started this position as CEO at the beginning of the pandemic. I moved from California to Florida, which in the United States is clear across the country. I did not start work in an office. I knew some of this staff members only because I'd been chair of the AACSB board, but I did not know a lot of members, and I basically moved into a townhouse and started Zooming with my staff, finding out who they were, what they did, what they needed. And as you know, at that time, 2 years ago in the pandemic, there was a great deal of uncertainty, as there is now in Ukraine. And it was clear to me as well that the AACSB needed to make some functional changes in how we approach leadership, and that it wasn't just my role as a CEO or my executive team's role, but all of our colleagues had to help us move into a new beginning. So these 4 tenets were developed and really implemented within probably 4 to 6 weeks of my arrival. We did not have time to sit and think and debate back and forth. We really had to implement a new leadership model and get our staff to understand what that leadership model looked like. So let's start with what leading self is. This is where we look to our leaders to possess self-awareness. I think some of you brought that up in the chat. We also want drive and purpose. We want people who are ambitious and want to improve, as well as empathy, which was also brought up in the chat. And I will add integrity. And I think this starts, and many of you brought this up, with listening. Listening is a really, we all say we listen, but how do we really, really listen? So truly caring about your colleagues, especially during the COVID time and now with your war, that it's willingness to really listen to see where they're at, meet them where they are, and willingness to put others above self. The second is leading others. And when leading others, great leaders are effective communicators. Effective communicators can build buy-in and influence attitudes and behaviors and mindsets. They also create a productive approach to coaching for performance and can handle conflict resolution in a very productive way. So I do understand how sensitive this is for all of you at this critical time. And so navigating your current situation, I think, makes this particular trait vital and is one that continues to be tested for you as us in real time. How do we really lead others and want people to follow us where we need to all, where we all need to be and continue to move forward in that. The third is to lead change. And as we all know, people are very resistant to change. We all say that we're not resistant to change, but I'm sure all the research shows that people really don't like change. It makes us feel uncomfortable. And so how do you lead change in an organization or in a country or in a school that really needs to change? Well, the first is, of course, being agile. We have to be willing to make decisions quickly and being able to move on those decisions. Second, I would add again, we have to be collaborative. You can't lead change without bringing other people along and understanding where everybody's at. We really have to be innovative, and I think many of those were in the chat. And innovative and creative are fundamental attributes of leading change. And this will bring effective leaders to the table and hopefully inspire others. So I've led a lot of change during my time as dean at 3 different universities, as well as here at AACSB, and change can be hard. It's always interesting to see who in an organization will change with you, who's resistant to change, and who basically just stonewalls and tries to wait you out. So what I've done as I tried to lead change is to get maybe 5 to 10% of the people who are really positive about the change and have them become part of the team. Hopefully they're also influencers within the organization, and really try to ignore the 10% who may not be interested in change or who may be naysayers. And then the rest of the people in the organization really will take it on once they see it's going to happen. So that's been my own kind of 10-10-80 rule within leading change in an organization. And finally, since I lead an organization, and many of you do as well, so leading an organization or a business requires you to be, for us, it's member focused. For many of you, it might be customer focused. And really understanding what your customers or what your members want or need from you. This means you're market driven. You have to be financially sound, and you have to be able to identify and analyze the key issues and industry trends and how they will impact your business model. So I make it a point to visit these attributes daily. And I schedule that on my calendar because I'm a big calendar person. And I ask myself, am I meeting not only the letter of these attributes, but I'm meeting the spirit of them as well? It requires me on a daily basis to step back, to reflect, and often to act in ways that are uncomfortable, but hopefully become more productive. So at AACSB, every staff member, regardless of their role in our organization, is a leader with the responsibility to lead theirself, to lead others, to lead change, and to lead the organization in the context of their own individual role. I think we've had a very successful 2.5 years as an organization by utilizing this leadership model. And I truly believe it's because we've asked our colleagues to work differently and embed these traits in their day-to-day interactions. And our executives have modeled these attributes for our staff. And I noticed some in the chat talked about that executives have to model the behavior. So while these work for AACSB, I think it's really important that individuals and organizations define your own leadership model and to give some time and effort into defining your own leadership model, given your context and your vision, with a focus on nurturing the entrepreneurial spirit of your colleagues. So you are the leaders of the future, and the steps you take now, the skills you acquire, the relationship you forge, and how you rebuild, create pathways for future generations and will inspire others to carry on your legacy. So once again, simply by joining this session and participating in the MIM's Business School Knowledge Hub, you're already energizing the leader from within, and together we can prepare for the future and support the collective growth of our society. So now I want to turn to personal leadership, about what leadership skills you as a person probably need to think about acquiring or possessing or amplifying. So AACSB is looking to the future with you. And as I said, we're interested in the future of creating future leaders with positive societal impact. But we understand that many challenges lie ahead. We really believe, though, that there are new personal leadership skills that you may not have thought about, and they did not come up in the chat, or all of them, required to meet the challenges. The top-down authoritarian leadership model no longer works in our new environment. So because we and others believe this to be true, we have been compelled to reevaluate the leadership traits our world now demands. We're focused on creating a leadership development framework with once again, the importance of creating positive societal impact for the future, and that's at its core. To do this, we've established a cohort of thought leaders and various stakeholders from around the world. They meet in what we refer to as accelerators, and they're tasked with building a framework focused on developing leaders, once again, who are inspired and empowered to create a positive impact on society. And to give you a flavor for this, AACSB schools impact 4 million students worldwide, as well as over 60,000 faculty members. So if we can do this right, we do have the ability to really create positive impact on the leaders of the future. So this work will culminate in a societal impact framework that will be released later this year. And so I'm giving you a sneak peek. It's not finished yet, but I'm excited to share some of our early insights to support all of you along your personal journey and for you to start thinking about whether these resonate with you. So a recent discussion in one of our accelerators revealed 3 competencies for impactful societal impact leadership. The first is compassion. And it is compassion to think about knowledge in context, facts, information, and experience or education of the person sharing the knowledge becomes really, really important. We also need to consider that history provides context for us. So a compassionate societal impact leader is open to contribution from all walks of life, as everyone has their story. They do not seek information from just 1 or 2 walks of life, but they look at the context in which they're sitting. So adapting a growth mindset is adapting on how you make sense of the world and yourself and how you make sense of yourself. It influences how you approach the world. So early on in my leadership journey, I do not believe I was compassionate enough, frankly. I really did like to tell people what to do. And what I focused on was efficiency. I was taught that a leader is efficient. We lived in a capitalistic society, efficiency reigns. And so I kept calendars, I kept task lists, I kept things moving, and everybody really rewarded me on my efficiency. But I want to give you a little context and a little story from my parenting skills where I practice efficiency to help you see where my leadership changed from efficiency and hopefully to effectiveness. So I'm a mother of 2 children. They're both young adults now. But when my little son was 5 or 4 or 5, it was a Friday afternoon. We had come home from work. We're ready for the end of the week, and he came up and said, "Mama, can I have my little friend up the street come over tonight and have a sleepover at the house?" And I turned to him without even thinking and said, "Michael, that is not on the calendar, and so no, it can't happen." And you might imagine the shock that he had, little tears welling up in his eyes. And my husband looked at me and he said, "Are you kidding me? What are you talking about? We don't have anything to do tonight. Of course, he can have a sleepover." And, I stepped back on that and I thought I was valuing efficiency over effectiveness. And being an efficient parent was not being an effective parent. And I have tried to take that now into my leadership, is that I can be an efficient leader, efficient CEO, efficient dean, but I would rather be an effective dean. And so that's an effective mother, an effective partner, an effective spouse, an effective CEO. And in order to do that, I've tried to be a much better leader by listening to others, to really hearing what they're saying, and then to act on that information rather than to have preconceived rules about how that information or what the decision I want to come out with and how I want that decision or that action to behave. So being compassionate for me, once again, it does not mean that I don't make the hard decisions. I think people know me will tell you that I do make the hard decisions. That includes letting people go that are not a good fit for our organization or whose roles we no longer need. But with that said, I still try to practice compassion as an organization we do as well, to provide opportunities for our colleagues to grow in our organization or to help people find different roles outside the organization. So the second is depolarization. And I think this is a really interesting attribute. So polarization occurs when people feel deep-seated anxiety about who they are, what their standing is, and what the next day will bring. And I'm sure all of you are feeling this in the situation that you're finding yourselves. The solution really has to be to focus on common ground and to be able to move forward and depolarize in a polarized world. So this means we have to understand how uncertainty and ambiguity can cause polarization. And that's the key to exhibiting depolarization. Binary thinking, and that's that there's only one way to do things, must be challenged. There is always another way. And so this requires that we be open and that we be curious and that we have respectful behavior. And all of these are very valuable traits. I think depolarization is difficult to execute if others really want to continue binary thinking. And it's one of the biggest challenges that we face in a society in the United States as well as around the world. But I do believe this is best addressed by continuing to ask questions and continuing to ask more questions and continuing to ask a lot more questions after that, so that a common understanding can be achieved. By asking questions, and a lot of questions, once again, once in a while, or a proposed solution can come about through that questioning to find out where the common ground is and where we can actually move forward. Once again, we understand where everybody situates and why they've come to this particular conclusion or this particular idea by themselves. And then the third characteristic that the accelerator has come up with is paradox. Paradox has the inherent meaning of being unsolvable, and it alludes to conflict. It's a lens to view situations which are subject to individual worldviews and parallel worldviews. So the willingness to engage with paradox, and we're all in this right now, is underpinning all of the other competencies we might see. Paradoxes can be resolved in several ways depending upon their type. So for example, if something is fragile, we need to show capacity and resilience. If something is anxious, we need to show empathy and mindfulness. If something is nonlinear, we need to show context and adaptability. And if something is incomprehensible, we need to show transparency and intuition. So those are the three competencies that we are looking at now in our societal impact and accelerators. And I want to talk a little bit about my personal life, where I've actually had to use all of these to solve some pretty challenging issues. So my husband was also a faculty member at Florida State. I was the dean there. He was actually a department chair. And I received a call from my assistant saying that he had had a seizure and that I needed to meet him in the office. After a lot of weeks, actually, of testing, et cetera, it turned out that he had stage 4 brain cancer, and he had a glioblastoma. So for those of you who know about brain cancer and glioblastomas, they're not really they're treatable, but they're not curable. And really the question is how long your life is and what the quality of that life looks like. Although there's a lot of radiation and chemotherapy that goes along with that. And we entered into that process. Meanwhile, within about 4 weeks or 5 weeks within that process, I received a call from my doctor telling me that my mammogram and the alternative and the follow-up from that revealed that I also had breast cancer. And I remember plainly saying, I can't have breast cancer. My husband has brain cancer. And the surgeon telling me, he says, oh, I'm so sorry. And basically left it at that. So fast forward, my breast cancer, I was able to treat. It will probably not recur. It was very, very early, and the catching, it was caught early, and I was able to move through that. Lynn's brain cancer, of course, after 20 months, he succumbed to it. And at that time, I had adult children, but very young adult children. And as well as my parents lived in the western part of the United States, and my dad was suffering from dementia. So layering on top of this, in this process, I learned a lot about compassion because it was exercised with me. People were very compassionate, willing to step in, willing to help out. And it taught me how important compassion was actually to people's individual circumstance. It also taught me a lot about depolarization. As you might all imagine, and many of you have had all this in your own life as well, there were several competing and different interests that needed to be taken into account. For example, my children really needed me to be with them closer in the West as they navigated this new life, as did my mother needed me. And so that's how I ended up actually at Santa Clara University in Silicon Valley because my children were in California. Santa Clara University is in California. So I was much closer to them personally. My parents were in the Mountain West. And so I was only an hour flight away as opposed to a 5 or 6 hour flight away. And so that really, those competing and different interests. I also had my professional interests to take into account. And there was a lot about paradox during this time period as we navigated, frankly, the unknown. We had no idea what was going to happen on the other end, and we still actually don't know that, but we needed to move to a different space. So I would not say that we moved forward, but we did pause and we reevaluated, and I think we moved sideways. And sometimes moving sideways is what's an important thing to do. And then we continued on to a new place, both mentally, physically, and emotionally. And so I wanted to give you this personal experience, and all of us have these types of personal experiences. Sometimes we don't draw on them for our professional experiences, and I think we should. We should draw on our personal experiences to make us better as a person, to make us better as a professional, or in the case of an organization, to make our organizations better. And in a countrywide crisis, I also think this approach can be used. So I know all of you, once again, have been on a similar journey, but I am filled with optimism. I'm a very optimistic, positive person. It's been my life experience that things eventually do work out. And I believe that you and your country will come out on the other side as you reframe and you rebuild. So thank you for having me as a speaker. I really look forward to the question and answer. I was a teacher for 25 years, and I think there will be some interesting questions on a variety of topics, and I'm open. So once again, thank you everyone for having us, and I look forward to the question and answers.
Thank you very much. We are here to ask questions, and also there were some from the audience. Let's start from this competence depolarization, which is not very common in the literature. I'm not an expert, but very interesting to hear about it. Immediately, the question is how. Now let's first of all, how you can somehow communicate and demonstrate to another person which you are not agreeing with that you have looking for a common ground. This is some kind of a personal face-to-face communication and question. But if you could, to address another matter as an educator in a business school, which would be very helpful for all of us. We are witnessing at the moment a lot of issues which are tearing up the societies. Let's mention the situation in Ukraine and related this cancel culture questions, or recent resolution about abortion of the Supreme Court of the US, which also created quite a lot of discussions. How would you address this in the audience, and how to use this ability of depolarization and how to teach people to let's say somehow narrow this gap, which is growing and becoming very, very difficult to address?
You know, I think, thank you very much for the question, because depolarization and being able to ask questions, I think is really, really, really important. In my teaching career, I taught law classes, business law classes, and I also taught business ethics. And so being able to, and this is the way I would approach it if I was teaching right now, what I would ask the students to actually, I would call on them. I don't let students in class not have an issue or an opinion. And I would ask them to take one side or the other. And so, for example, let's take the abortion debate, which is in the United States, is coming up. For many of you know, the Supreme Court ruled that it was not a constitutional right. I would use that in my class. I am not the one who steers away from conflict, who steers away from debate. And so what I would ask is the person to come up with reasons why they support the particular rule and why they oppose it. And we would put those on the board. And then we would start going through some questions. And those questions might be, when do you believe life begins? And that's an interesting question for a lot of people. And you would continue to ask them, does it begin at this point in time? Does it begin at that point in time? What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And make people really think hard about what their position is. Because many of us say we have a particular position. And then as we delve down at it, it's not a yes or a no. It's very complicated. So if this were a 13-year-old, would you have the same answer? If this were a 45-year-old, would you have the same answer? Is it okay to investigate women who have miscarriages, et cetera? And so I would spend a full class period, maybe 2 class periods, maybe 3 class periods, and having the students themselves tell me what their position is. Now, once in a while in class, as a professor, you have to take the opposite side, because maybe all the students think they believe the same thing. And that means they're not really thinking hard about moving from the binary approach to a subject approach. And one of the things we used to talk about is, are we a rule-oriented society, or are we a virtue society? And so some of those questions are, would you tell a lie? Those are very simple ethical questions. When would you tell a lie? Most people say lying is never allowed. But then as you walk back through it, is lying allowed to protect someone's life? Is lying allowed to do this? Is lying allowed to do that? So people can see the context and the complexity of what these issues look like. And so those are the ways that I would handle it in class. They're fraught with error. I think you have to be really careful as a faculty member not to impose your own value system upon the student, but to have the students themselves think hard about the questions. And I model asking a lot of questions and probing what their answers are and why they've come up to their answers, and not taking what they say as a starting point for what they actually believe, because most of those issues are significantly more complex than what they even can think as you probe into the questions and the reasons why they believe that. I hope that helps kind of explain how I would handle that in a particular classroom setting, and you can do it on a variety of all types of issues.
Yeah, thank you very much. But you mentioned ethics, and we mostly speak about not leaders in general, but business leaders in particular. And business and ethics is a complicated issue. Now let's formulate in the following way. Just recently, there were scandals erupted around so-called ESG investment funds. And these scandals erupted not only in the US, but also in Europe, in Germany. And actually, for some years, these funds were considered as one of the brightest examples of the trend, of the very positive trend in business community towards this environmental, social, and governance issues. And now greenwashing is somehow associated with money laundering more and more. And several managers of these funds started to claim that ethics is a responsibility of clients rather than theirs. What would you comment on this? But business leaders, effective business leader, ethics, ESG fund don't care about anything.
They need to care. Society demands that they care, and greenwashing or placing the blame on someone else is not is really going forward. I don't think the public is going to put up with it, and you can see that with how quick the backlash was against the greenwashing, how quick the individuals had to respond to it. And now the care with what we have to take with the SDGs and a variety of other things that businesses look at. What I think would be really interesting, and why AACSB is involved in this quest, is that the young people right now really won't tolerate working for companies that they don't think have a moral or a value purpose. And so for those companies who want to attract talent, who want to attract the best talent in the world, they really need to be clear what their value is, what their purpose is, and they cannot be involved in anything other than full integrity. And that doesn't mean we all have to agree. I mean, a company can say climate change is not going to be what we focus on. That's not who we are. If that's true, then people can decide whether to work for them or not. And I think that this new generation of students, I'm sure you're seeing it in Europe, that they are very passionate. They believe that they can make a difference. They've already made a difference in the world. And as all of us look for talent, I was just in Europe last week, and it looks like the Europeans are the same as in the US. There's not enough talent to go around. And so if we want to attract people to work for us, we're going to have to be significantly better. And we cannot pass the buck onto someone else, especially when we're publicly reporting what happens.
Thank you. Continue with the business leaders. According to Edelman Trust barometers, people in many countries, US in particular, there was no such inquiry in the Ukraine, so I can't refer to Ukraine, but in many other countries as well, people presume that business is more efficient, which is not and effective, which is not a surprise, but also more ethical, more ethical than government. Is it real? Do you believe it's a reality? And what to do with this then?
Ooh, I think that's hard. Thank you for a very difficult question. It's clearly people's perception. And maybe some of that came from the missteps of government during the pandemic. Maybe some of it came from the missteps of governments with conflict. And frankly, in many countries, we have not had highly ethical leaders in high government places. And so when you see a lack of integrity, you see a lot of self-interest in government leaders. I think that does devolve into a lack of trust for government. I hope that we can get ourselves out of that, because I believe, and I'm pretty confident, that government does have a role to play in ensuring that our societies are safe and that they're fair, and that people have the ability to succeed in them. And it's very difficult for business to take that role on. It's very difficult for business to marshal the assets that government can marshal. But it will require us electing, for those countries that are democratic, electing new leaders that exhibit the behaviors we want to see, and hopefully stepping away from electing polarizing leaders that are interested in power and not necessarily interested in the common good. I'm a big proponent of virtue ethics and in seeking the common good. And I believe that government really needs to double down on that if it wants to survive.
It's interesting because I'm not sure about other countries, but in Ukraine is a trend that, if you're a successful leader of a commercial company, of a business, then you have a chance to be a successful leader as a social leader in public, in a government. So this is not always obvious, I would say, but people assume that it should be. And then we have a lot of examples, successful and not very successful, when a business leader start to govern, not only to lead commercial companies.
That's correct.
But you mentioned democracy, and also in another paradox, leaders should somehow be able to resolve paradox. But the other paradox is that trust in business is declining recently in last years in most let's call it normal or standard democratic countries, US in particular, by the way. So the trust in business is declining. At the same time, the trust in business is growing in countries like China, United Arab Emirates, and Brazil. Well, they also, let's say, democratic, but we somehow try to find another adjectives on how to define this. Yeah. What is your opinion? Is something wrong with the business headquarters in democratic countries, or something wrong with democracies?
Ooh, I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. I think that when we have social media, and the social media forces people into a binary choice by its algorithms and a variety of other mechanisms, that people think that it's a yes or no, and it's a good or bad. I don't see governments being good or bad, except maybe a handful of them, which we can name, and I don't see businesses being good or bad, but it's a continuum of behaviors of what the business does and what the business leaders do. I do think, though, that the problems in the world are really calling for a new brand of leadership, whether it's in government or whether it is in business. And that brand needs to be much more compassionate, much more straightforward, much more transparent in what they're seeking. as well as looking out for the common good once again, and not for their own personal interest or their personal interest of their friends and family. And I think that's maybe where you've seen the devolving. It's now almost impossible to get away with bad behavior. There's videos, there's people watching you all the time. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad deal. I don't know about you, but my mother and father used to ask me, would you like to see your behavior show on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow morning? And that always made me step back and say, probably not, if I'm doing things that are negative. It's an old, it's an old question, but I think still relevant, because you can pretty much assure your behavior is going to appear on the front page of some social media place if you're engaged in bad behavior. So I'm really hoping a new generation of business leaders help us solve these types of paradoxes.
So we are looking forward to this new business leaders. Our business school is more working with executives,
Yep.
elder people. So you AACSB members are a normal business school working just on a master level from younger people. So we are optimistic about this younger generation and then their approach to business, because this generation theories, which all the time assumes that new generation will make a change, a big change, is not the first time. It's Millennium and others is not the first forecast. So are you optimistic?
I'm very optimistic, and a lot of business schools have, the baccalaureate degree, which is usually 18 to 22 years old, very impressionable, but unlikely to move immediately into leadership roles. Although many of them, frankly, would like to move immediately into leadership roles. Then, of course, you have the master's and professional education, which is usually in people's mid-20s. And then many business schools like MIM also do executive training, where people come back literally their 30s, 40s, maybe their 50s, really to refresh or to move into new roles. So this continuum of lifelong learning is very, very common for business schools, and I think plays an important role. Unlike other places in universities, business schools are responsible for leaders from whatever stage they're in. And what I would hope is that those leaders come back to school with an idea that they want to improve, they want to be better, and they want the help doing that. I think the challenge for business schools is a lot of these leadership skills you have to practice. You don't learn about them. You don't just read them, but you have to practice doing them. And so I think one of our challenges is, how do we create a classroom activities or a curriculum activity where people practice? And for example, I think to be resilient, you have to fail. Well, students don't like to fail. So how do you create a classroom environment where they fail, but then they can come up and succeed after they learn from the failure? A very interesting question on classroom pedagogy. Same thing with agility. You can teach about agility, but really the only way to be agile is to practice doing that. So imagine a class where you walk in today and you say, okay, the syllabus we had, we're throwing out the window because it doesn't apply anymore. And here's our new rules.
Mm-hmm.
Most of your students are going to be really
quite an agile approach. Quite an agile approach, I would say.
But it will help them learn agility.
It's provoked me another question. This was from the audience about nonlinear development, nonlinear what? Well, let me reformulate it in the following way. Nonlinear, no changes is nice, pretty nice and fancy words. That in essence is that we don't know what will happen. Because we cannot predict, we cannot use our normal prediction, our own approximation on how it will be in the future. So something, let's say black swan or other metaphors. So leaders as well, they don't know what will happen.
Right.
So and they need to lead.
Right.
What is your advice then? So nobody knows, leaders in particular, what to happen, and they need to lead, need to.
And let me add to that. Yeah, you cannot be paralyzed by not knowing what the future will bring. And so my advice and what I try to practice, and it's scary. I mean, it's just, it's scary to lead without some sort of predictor. I'm not sure we ever had predictors. We thought we had models that would predict. You could look at the past, you could forecast, et cetera. I don't think our forecasts were ever that great. But now we really know that we can't predict the future. And so that's why we're focusing on the leadership skills that you need in order to move in an uncertain future. And sometimes you're not going to make the right choice. You're just not going to make the right choice, but you have to make a choice. And then you have to reflect and you have to be willing to change your mind. And that's a skill that a lot of leaders don't have. Can you change your mind or change course once you've set towards doing it? And in a new world, I mean, who would have thought in a pandemic that, we went from face-to-face classes to not face-to-face classrooms in 2 weeks? Who would have thought? Maybe many people in your country did, but who would have thought Russia would have actually invaded Ukraine and disrupted the total economy? And now you still have to make decisions. You still have to move forward. And so I think if you have compassion, if you have the practice of depolarization, if you can deal with paradox, then you can still operate in a world that's incredibly uncertain because you have a way to behave and act that doesn't require that you know what the end result is.
I like this. I like this, that leaders need to make decisions. Otherwise, they are not leaders. Even they don't know at all what and how it will happen. That's important. I have a personal question. You became a CEO of the AACSB in June 2020. And I hardly imagine the worst time to become a CEO of an organization, of a company. Pandemic, lockdowns, nobody knows where to go. The future is very uncertain. Disruption in business education. Chinese no longer entering the universities in the US. Yeah. Images of the war, etc. Not about the Ukrainian war, but others. So how do you, let's say, deal with these challenges and personal stresses?
Well, I laugh a lot. I read widely. I also watched a lot of movies, like a lot of other people did. But really, I have a large cadre of colleagues that I depend upon. For me, actually, that was the hardest, of meeting with colleagues who I really trust. Usually face-to-face, or being able to get together and discuss things, and having to do that all on Zoom was very, very hard for me. I'll be frank with that. Just the isolation of being really by yourself, even though you can meet people on Zoom all day long, it's not the same as that face-to-face interaction and those colleagues. And so what I try to do really is to rely on people that I trust, meet new people like yourself, and learn. Read widely and try to take what I've learned in other contexts and apply it to the context that I'm in. And I'm also pretty good at changing my mind if it doesn't work out. So I think I said I lived in Silicon Valley, so I did talk a lot about disruption. I always thought the disruption in higher ed would come from technology. I would have never predicted it came from a virus. And technology didn't save us. But the same practice about being able to move in the context of disruption, I think, is very, very important.
Well, it's coming from technology as well. So the virus just, added somehow. Yep, thank you very much, Dr. Beck-Dudley, for your very impressive lecture and very meaningful answers and frank answers. We appreciate it very much. And many thanks to attendees for your attention and for your questions. I trust that record of this conversation will be seen and thought over by many participants who couldn't join us today. And our ReinforceUa project is in full run now, on full speed. And I invite you, everybody, for the next event, which will happen tomorrow at 4 p.m., not the standard time. Please check your calendars. And we shall have a guest who is a historian, the author of bestsellers who shaped our perceptions of ourselves and the present and the future of humanity. And not the least to mention the friend of Ukraine, Professor Yuval Noah Harari. So we shall be speaking on the meaning of the war for us today, and for the world, both today, at present, and in the future. On our webpage, you can ask questions in advance to Professor Harari if you wish. And if you will join our supporters or educational project to support temporarily displaced women that are going to start their own businesses, we would appreciate it, any kind of your donation, whatever you could donate. Thank you again, and we are looking forward to meet you again, let's say tomorrow. And also the project will last every week on ReinforceUa. Thank you again, Professor. Well, goodbye, and Slava Ukraini.
Thank you.
The war in Ukraine has changed the world, and now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project ReinforceUa, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on ReinforceUa.com.